Welcome to the Menophona podcast. My name is Corey, your host, and today I'm going to be talking about the second wave of coronavirus and how to survive it. And it's definitely something that is, in fact, a long overdue episode. It's something that I think is going to be very important based on what's happened during the year. Since the beginning of the coronavirus and before we went on to lockdown, I did talk about this briefly with other people and stuff like that, where we're talking about the mental well-being of people and how society was going to shift based on what was happening. So as the lockdown happened, I personally did not go on to lockdown because I was one of the key workers. So I work as an engineer, so I never had to go into lockdown. I was working in the food industry, so I continued working and but yet my family was at home, so my wife had to teach one of our kids from home, and over the next few weeks, I saw her deteriorate in terms of just emotionally and mentally, because she had no other adults to hang out with, and not just obviously me, but I mean her friends, and so she can become Gemma instead of wife or mother. So, and it's very important to be able to free yourself to be just yourself rather than playing the role that you normally play within your house. And there seemed to be no escape for her, and that just was her now getting into a place where she was struggling. And she's not exception to everybody. Everybody was struggling, and to a certain extent, I was struggling because she was struggling. So now we're coming towards the second wave. There's now plans to get people into doing social distancing, and there's potential that we might go back onto lockdown. I think it's good to think about the things that talk about the things that people would experience negatively and how to overcome those things that are negative in terms of your mental well-being. And there's a lot of things that I was listening on the radio that they've cancelled some of the pilot schemes in terms of people leaving their houses and going to watch rugby games and potential football games and live events, and how that is got a profound impact on their lives, because they would go to a football game in order to socialize, but also to escape the normal life. And I totally agree with that, because there's a lot of people that use different outside stimulus in order to change their state, and they need that sort of like a pressure valve of a tire or something, that if you release the pressure, then it's distress. So it is okay for people to have outward sources of distressing, which many people have got different ways of doing it, and it's quite healthy to actually have that. So some people go to the gym, some people go running, some people go and do things that are positive, that have got positive confirmations, or something that is positive towards their mental well-being. But when you've taken that away, how do you get to that point where you have those positive ways of distressing? So that's what I was lacking in the last point there. That it's how do you create positive ways of distressing? And you also have to think about that if you do need external sources to distress, what if that is been taken away, what are the other things that you can do in order to distress? Now, while I say it's good to have external sources to distress or to get your mental well-being to a place of ease, it becomes important to understand that the reason why you feel like you need an external source, it means that in your mind, you've already decided that there's something wrong with you, or there's something that is your default state is that you're unhappy, and you need to do something in order to make yourself feel happy. And this is a lot of it is society. Society is been focuses on the negative. So if you watch news long enough, you would think that the world is coming to an end. If you woke up from a coma after years of being in a coma and you literally watch the news, you would think the world was coming to an end because of how negative it is. So it puts you in that negative spiral. So you and again, I usually talk about RAS, which is a reticular activation system, where if you decide something, so for instance, you watch a bit of news, you decide that the world is going to shit. For instance, you start. It's almost like you wear those glasses of the world is going to shit, and you're now just looking for every confirmation of the world is going to shit. So if somebody cuts you off, oh my god, I can't believe how human beings are behaving now. Back in the day, people would drive and be courteous and so it becomes this downward spiral. So while it's good to be able to have a place to distress in terms of meeting other people and going to football and going to the pub and having dinner outside and going to the theatre, all those things that have been taken away that are external stimulus, it also becomes very important to find internal things that trigger happiness. So this is what I'm trying to get at, and I went the long way to actually get to this point, which is how do you get internal triggers for you to feel happy, for you to feel at ease. And this is one of the things that I found the most difficult way, because for me, I went through a point where I would get so stressed, and because I was stressed, I used different things to try and get me to that point of ease. And for me, it became food. So I would eat a lot of food and abuse how I eat food, like overeat, and also go to porn sites and masturbation, and all those things were the things that I would use in order to get to that point of my mind to a point of ease. And that can be a very negative thing. There's nothing wrong with masturbation. There's nothing wrong with indulging in food. But it has to be the right setting. So for instance, with food, if you are at a Christmas party and you're overindulging, there's no problem with that. If you're overeating and you're eating the most rubbish food and you're in the celebratory environment, that's amazing. That's good. If you are... so for instance, if you are eating cake and it's being shared amongst 15 people, not a problem at all. That's what I say. If you bought 2 pieces of cake and one was being shared amongst 15 people and it was a birthday party, there's no big deal with that. But if I took that piece of cake that was for 15 people and then I eat it by myself, and that's one sitting, then there is a big issue there. So everything within moderation, but my main point is, how do you get that thing, how do you get to that point where you get things that are external, that are internal? How do you trigger yourself into happiness with things that are internally? And the first thing is definitely figuring out what it is that keeps you down. So we all have an internal dialogue, and this internal dialogue is the main thing that makes us want to feel like escaping. So, if, for instance, you've got some sort of trauma where somebody has called you names, or you've been bullied, you've been sexually abused, you've been called names, you've had abusive parents or something like that, your father was drunk, he used to beat you up, all sorts of reasons, maybe you're to watch your mother die, whatever you're trying to escape. We usually get those feelings to start coming up the moment we're by ourselves, and you have to you're not watching TV, you're not doing anything else, and you're sitting by yourself, those feelings start coming up, and all of a sudden you feel like you need to do something in order to cover it up. Sorry, excuse me. So the first thing is dealing with it, and the best way of dealing with it is actually letting it come to the surface, and you try and figure out what it is. So for instance, if it's something that's to do with abuse, who abused me, I'm a big in terms of writing down. So you write down the way you're feeling, and because again, it's not a thing that's going to change overnight, but being able to write down what exactly you're feeling is one of the steps of actually trying to figure out and putting it on paper, because a lot of it's not fact. A lot of it is fiction. That is, your mind has got a way of stretching time and making things much bigger than they are. So for instance, if you were traumatized as a child, for instance, and it was something that was something quite minuscule, you go into a process of avoiding that pain and trying not to relive that pain. And if you actually confronted it, you would realize that it's not as big as it is. Now, I'm not saying I don't know what pain you're trying to escape, but everybody's got variant, places in terms of the pain that is. So if it's, for instance, sexual abuse as compared to a kid calling you fat or something in school, there's just different stages, but all of it is all trauma, and we're all trying to escape it to a certain degree. So this is one of the things that causes people to get into that place of wanting to escape, and they need to go and watch football in order to feel a part of something and to feel like they're having fun, and just to get their state of mind to a different position, or at least escape from having to feel numb. So you're almost numbing yourself from the feeling of, whatever feeling you're trying to escape. So again, the first step would be to allow that stuff to come to the surface. And this, I've learned it from Julian Blanc, and he talks about how you allow that thing to come to the surface. When it comes to the surface, then the best way of dealing with it, again, is first, at least writing it down is one step, so you can see the extent of it. So for instance, if it's sexual, you write that it was a sexual thing, and then at that point, you, instead of punishing yourself, you forgive yourself. I think we tend to want to project and give that because somebody has harmed us, we constantly try and find ways of punishing them, and by punishing them, we punish ourselves. So and because again, a lot of it, in fact, a large majority of the things that we're trying to escape from is got a shame associated with it. Because of the shame associated with it, that's the reason why you're forgiving yourself. You're not forgiving yourself because you've been sexually abused, or no, it's never your fault. It's some of the trauma that you've gone through, it was never your fault, regardless of when it happened. And sometimes if you've caused trauma, it can be quite a difficult experience. So yes, it might be your fault that you caused that trauma, but again, it comes back down to the fact that you're carrying shame, so you need to just forgive yourself for carrying that shame. When you forgive yourself, then it gives you that opportunity to be able to forgive that other person, or the person that's hurt you, or at least let go of that situation that hurt you. Now, this is not literally a thing that you can do within 2 minutes and all of a sudden you're cured. And the important bit about writing it is the fact that you've written it down, and then the next time you feel like it's happening again, you write it down again. So now, if you continuously working on this in terms of you allowing yourself to feel it, and allowing yourself to forgive yourself and to forgive that person that's hurt you, and it's going through a process of even having somebody, and the process of forgiving and forgiving yourself and forgiving the other person is actually talking to somebody. And this could be a close friend, and could be somebody that's a therapist, or as a professional. Now, this is where things become a little bit tricky, because most people do not want to see a therapist. They feel like they're okay, and they've been walking around thinking that they're okay. But it becomes very important to see a professional. If you cannot see a professional, it's now about being able to form friendships with people that you trust, joining Facebook groups of people that are like-minded, that will not judge you. So this is the reason why we got the Men on a Facebook group, where men can come and share, the feelings and get some support. So there's things like this. For instance, we talked about that you need that internal dialogue that you're having. You can start actually engage in that dialogue and start taking notes of what's actually happening. And then the work that you do is, again, start sharing your problem and talking to somebody, because then the reason why you've suffered for so long is because you've not told anyone, you've not spoken out about it. And going forward, where you're not allowed to meet anyone and not be around people, it will make that dialogue even louder. So if you imagine it being a stereo or a radio, for instance, being on lockdown and not being able to talk about it, it just makes it even louder, and it makes you feel more isolated. And again, this is the reason why it becomes even more difficult, and your mental well-being will deteriorate over time. So, and by no means I'm not saying that this is the treatment for depression and stuff. You still have to see a professional. I'm not a professional. It's a disclaimer. I'm not a professional. So if you do take some of this advice, you've decided to make those decisions, I still advise you to go and see a professional. And this is part of the healing process, seeing somebody who's a professional who can talk you through the situations of your trauma and actually start letting go. So what did we talk about? We talked about letting it come to the surface. We talked about starting to deal with it. Dealing with it is to at least write it down, have that internal dialogue, start to communicate with that dialogue. That, if they say you're useless and pathetic, why am I useless and pathetic? Because when you start writing it down, you start being able to distinguish between fiction and fact. So, for instance, if my internal dialogue would be, I'm useless and pathetic and not good. But reality is, I've got a wife, family, I'm an engineer, earn relatively good money and stuff like that. So it's stuff that do not reflect what I'm talking about within inside myself in the self-dialogue, or where I'm took myself down. So when you can distinguish and see that, you will see that there's a progression between you taking yourself down, and over the next 2 or 3 weeks, you see that there's a difference. After 2 months, there's a difference, and it's a process that you work towards. And there's other things that you can now lace in there, whether it's meditation in the morning, being able to train and going to the gym. Now, this is my second week going to the gym early in the morning. It's done wonders for my wellness, my mental well-being, just waking up. And it's a matter of getting those easy wins early in the morning. And the win is not going to the gym, is actually waking up and then putting those gym clothes on and then getting out of the door. So even if it means getting out of the door and walking around the block, that's a win. And start looking for those wins and getting those wins. So just in that in itself is a process of where you can start, in terms of if a second lockdown happens and you don't know what else to do, that's the first place where you can start. If you don't know who to talk to, again, you can join the Men of Honor Facebook group, and we're more than happy to help, so you can support you and everything that you want to do if you're struggling. And if you wanted to talk to somebody, again, I'm here if you wanted to talk. You can find me on Instagram, Kuri Mahamba. So Kuri Mahamba, it's on my Instagram. It's KURIMAHAMBA. So I hope this has been helpful. I know there's a lot of fear, especially when it comes to the mental well-being when you're going towards a second lockdown. What's going to happen with Christmas? Am I going to be with family? Am I going to be alone? If you are, divorced, for instance, and you haven't seen your children, are you going to be able to see your children? What are all the implications of what's happening, and you're afraid? So I thought I'd make this episode in response to possibly what I'm in the UK, so Boris Johnson is going to be making a speech, or I think he's made a speech. I'm not sure yet, but I heard over the radio that there's quite a lot of response in terms of the things that have been cancelled and the mental well-being of people, and it's something that I do not take lightly, and it's something that I feel like there's things that are not being said. I think there's going to be more and more people that are going to be prescribed medication, and medication, it helps because sometimes sometimes you cannot see a way out, But I'm more of a believer that even though you're taking medication, you should be able to start looking into what is the actual cause, what's the root cause of the actual issue. And that's, my main driving force. So thank you very much for listening. And I sort of was ranting, sort of teaching, sort of going around in circles. I've never scripted any of these podcast episodes. I'm going to try and keep it that way for as long as possible. I think at some points I'm going to have to script some of it. But thank you very much for listening. And if you find this helpful, please leave a review and share it with somebody that you think is going to be beneficial for them. So thank you very much for listening. And I will be seeing you very soon. Thank you.